If I think about it, I don't actually think I've shared the full story as to how I got into making jewellery. I've shared bits and bobs over socials, etc., but I've never shared the full ins and outs, ups and downs of how I actually got into this game. So I figured I'd share a little bit more of a long format story time as to how I got into making jewellery, and I hope you enjoy. From the beginning, I essentially had no interest in arts, design, craft, anything along those lines at all. In fact, it was quite the opposite. I was the sporty type, and I used to run for my borough. I used to play for Spurs in the youth setup, that's Tottenham Hotspur, so I was in the youth team for a couple of years, and I played to a good standard. Cut forward a few years, I got a bit bored of football, I had some injuries, I didn't go full time with the YTS or scholarship, and I essentially gave up. I just got bored of it. But with hindsight, I suppose you could say that that means that I didn't love it enough. So going into my working life now, my wife had always worked. She'd worked since we was at school with a Saturday job, and she was working at the time, and we must have been 17, 18, and I felt like a bit of a sorry case. So I had to go and find some work. So I ended up going into personal training. The qualification was free, it was government funded because I was under 18, so I jumped at it. I was relatively fit after playing football, so I was like, okay, it seems like a perfect match. So I started personal training. I got the qualification, and I must have qualified when I was like 17, 18, late 17, early 18. And I enjoyed it. I loved it. I worked in a couple of gyms. I was self-employed. I worked for myself at 18, which seemed quite fun and liberating, although quite daunting as well. But fast forward a couple of years, must have been 2021, I started to get really, really bored, and I was quite disillusioned with it actually. And I didn't actually believe in the product. I didn't think it was as important as it was being sold as. And I felt quite disingenuous selling an expensive product that I didn't actually believe in. I didn't intend to leave, but I wanted to do something as a hobby, something outside of work that I could sort of get my mitts into. So I Googled creative hobbies. And you had your typicals on there, you had your painting, your drawing, your crafting, whatever. And I couldn't draw or anything like that, but then, so I had no interest in doing that side of things. But then jewellery making came up, and it was actually silversmithing. And my granddad used to have some work made from a jeweller / silversmith in Camden. And so I had a vague understanding of some of the process, or the fact that you could actually do it as a job. And it kind of piqued my interest, and I was kind of like, oh, okay, let me just sort of delve into that. So I started Googling a little bit more, found some YouTube videos about jewellery making and what tools to buy and all the rest. I was like, okay, let's try this. So I got a couple of tools, spent a few £100 on some pretty basic tools, and I had no idea how expensive the tools were. So I went to eBay and found some cheap and nasty stuff from there, but it got me started. It opened the door, if you will. And I was making stuff for my mum's dining room table, burning little rings on it from hot jewellery and stuff like that, and she weren't best pleased, but I suppose in the long run, I hope she's happy with it now. And I started making stuff, very, very basic, all self-taught. I used YouTube a lot for tutorials, and there was one particular channel that I'd used quite a lot, and it was very, very helpful. It was essentially just following these tutorials and building up a degree of knowledge. And again, this wasn't intended to be a career, it was just something that was just keeping me going, keeping me interested, and keeping my mind and hands occupied while I was sort of bored at work. And turns out I was actually okay. I mean, the stuff was basic, but I didn't feel clunky enough that it deterred me. It was encouraging. There was enough there that I was sort of, I saw enough potential to keep making. And fast forward a few months now, maybe 3 months, I'd spent a fair bit. I mean, it wasn't a lot, but at the time it felt like a lot. I must have spent about £500 or so on some silver tools and stones and all the rest of it. And at the time that felt quite a lot to me, so I was kind of like, right, I need to try and get some of this back because this is getting silly, I can't sustain this. So I actually quit my job. I went from unsustainable to even more unsustainable from a monetary perspective. But I was like, I need to just be able to focus on this. I can't have distractions. I'm not very good at multitasking from that side of things. So I just jumped at the opportunity to quit my job and start this. I had no savings, anything along those lines. So it was very much a leap of faith, if you will, a big risk. The only backup I had was going back into personal training. So I applied for Brick Lane Market, and it was essentially at that stage when you first apply, it's a temporary basis. So you'd apply, and then when the day became available, and providing that they liked your stuff, they'd say, okay, we've got a day on this date, you can come and trade, pay for the day, trade for the day, and then you have to apply again. And I kept going like that for a couple of weeks, couple of months. And every time I went, I was developing my stall, I was looking at other traders, and I was thinking, okay, they're doing this, I can try this. And I was sort of essentially market research about seeing what people liked, how to set up my stand, etc. So it was a really good sort of introduction. But then it was great because the market offered me a permanent spot, which was fantastic. And I sort of figured, okay, that's great. I've got a permanent selling spot on a Saturday, Sunday. I'd make in my mum's garage on a Monday to Friday, and then I'd sell on the weekends. And I figured the permanent spot was great because people would come every weekend if they was locals, and they would keep seeing me, and you build relationships. And it turned out to be true. It was great. I loved it there. I'd developed a little community. I'd noticed people coming by every other weekend, and then they'd eventually buy something, and it sort of just snowballed from there, which was great. But there was downsides. I had to take like a massive suitcase along with me on the train, and that was end up being a pain in the bum. I used to use marble for my display, like slabs of marble, and it was super heavy, and I remember lugging it about. So it's hard work, and I got fed up with that side of things. So, and there's a section of the markets called the tea rooms, which is essentially like a permanent setup, if you will. It was like a small container-sized unit, and then within that unit you could sort of decorate it however you would see fit. And this permanent spot was great because it gave me more of a luxurious feel, a more trusting feel, because by this stage I'd started to work a little bit in gold. I'd only worked in silver prior to this, obviously because of the price of gold compared to silver. Silver's more accessible. But I always had an idea of what I wanted to make. I remember when I first started thinking about making jewellery, I saw an article in the Metro paper. I was on the way to a personal training client, and it was about a silver ring that had been dug up. And they was like, oh, it's been sent off to a museum, etc. But this ring looked so good. And I was like, how can this be? It's like hundreds, if not thousands of years old, and it looks great. So I was like, okay, that was my only real knowledge of design and jewellery. So I was kind of like, right, okay, that could work. I love the look of that sort of stuff. So I always knew I wanted to make sort of higher end stuff, working with gold and precious stones, etc. So I'd always had in my mind from the start that that was where I was going. And the tea rooms felt like a perfect little sort of my own little nook of jewels, if you will. So I'd saved up quite a lot for gold. And I must have saved up maybe £15,000-20,000 worth of stuff. And that was retail value. So, but unfortunately, one day I got robbed. It was not fun. I wouldn't recommend it. But basically all the stuff of value got taken, and it must have been like an organised thing because, like I said, only things of value was taken. So they must have known where everything was. But anyway, I tried to be philosophical about this, and I remember I was with my brother at the time, and I remember saying to him, I was like, mate, they've taken everything of note is gone. And I also said to my mate, Phil, who was also in the tea rooms at the time, I remember joking to him, I was like, oh, alright mate, like, I'll have my stuff back now. And he looked at me sort of like, mate, I haven't touched anything. So yeah, not a fun experience. I don't recommend it on anyone. But I looked at it relatively philosophically. And I was only 23, 24, so I'm actually surprised at myself about how I thought about this. But I was like, okay, this is time for me to move on. I shouldn't be selling this stuff in the markets, which is true. I mean, how often are you going to stumble into a Brick Lane or stumble into any market and buy an 18 karat gold ring with diamonds or sapphires in it? It don't happen. So anyway, that was the universe telling me to change it up. And at the time as well, it was in the winter, and I was working in my mum's garage, and it was freezing. I remember my feet were absolutely like, they felt like they was on fire. I had chilblains. And I went in to make a cup of tea, and I was talking to my mum about it, and she was like, blimey, you'd think that you was a tarmacker, not making jewellery. I was like, you know what, that's true. Like, and I had a sense of pride, and I was like, I should have a studio. I'm making some relatively nice stuff. I should have a dedicated space. to make stuff. So I applied for a studio, and I'm in the same building where I started this. I got this studio maybe 5 years ago, I was in this building 5 years ago in a different studio, and I've had 3 studios within the building since then. And it was a big jump because the market was my only real selling platform. I didn't have much of an online presence at all, and I had no real sort of sales coming from the website, and everything was in person. So it was a jump coming here because I'd be reducing my selling footprint, if you will. But it worked out. And I suppose you could say that the experience I had at Brick Lane with getting all my stuff nicked subconsciously made me want to not hold stock, because ever since then, and since I've moved into studios, I've never held stock. Everything's made one of one, unique, made to order and bespoke. So customers would come in, we'd go through the design process, the stone sourcing process, and make something from scratch. It must have been a case that I was put off by holding stock, and that would make sense. But there we go. We're 9 years into my making journey so far, and it's been a special journey. I've learned a lot, and throughout this period, it's seen me still with my girlfriend, who at the time, it was now my wife, and we've moved into our now second home. We bought our first flat, we moved into our home, we've had 3 children since then, so a lot has gone on in that time period. But the one thing I do love about this game and this art form is that it's a long game, and to some that's quite off-putting because it requires dedication, and you have to invest time and frankly money in your tools, your materials, your portfolio, your body of work. And like I said, that can be off-putting to people. A traditional apprenticeship is 5 to 6 years. So I looked at the first 4 to 5 years of me teaching myself as my apprenticeship. So you could say really I've only been into the career maybe 5 years or so. But altogether it's been 9 years worth of making, and I've loved every second of it. And there's still loads more to learn. I still feel like I'm very, very early days, and for the work that I want to be producing, it's definitely early days. And I can't wait to see what the future holds. I'm going to be sharing a lot more of the process here on YouTube than I have been. It can be challenging with managing time, etc., with bespoke projects, and filming everything, and editing, and getting it up, and working on all different social platforms, etc. So there's a lot to juggle, but I'm going to make it more of a thing here on YouTube, because I think the long form process is really what separates bespoke jewellery compared to off-the-shelf jewellery. And I look forward to sharing that with you.